beneath the Athenian sky. Close your eyes and imagine the soft hush of evening settling over ancient Athens. The Acropolis rises gently above the city, bathed in the fading glow of the setting sun. The marble steps are cool beneath your feet, and the cicadas hum softly in the olive groves below. In the distance, the blue horizon of the Aegean Sea merges with the sky, dotted with sails that drift lazily toward the harbors of Piraeus. At the very top of this sacred hill stands a temple unlike any other, its columns glowing golden as the last rays of sunlight strike their surfaces. This is the Parthenon, the jewel of Athens, a monument to the goddess Athena, protector of the city, goddess of wisdom, and embodiment of strength and grace. The Parthenon is not only a building, it is a story in stone, a prayer carved in marble, a harmony of balance and symmetry designed to honor both gods and mortals. Each column, each frieze, each block of shining Pentelic marble was placed with devotion, as though the builders wished to capture eternity in form and light. But before we wander too close, let us pause. Feel the calm of the night beginning to descend. A soft breeze flows across the Acropolis, carrying with it the scent of olive branches, the smoke of hearth fires below, and the quiet murmur of Athenians gathering in courtyards, sharing stories of gods and heroes. In this stillness, the Parthenon is not only a temple, but also a witness to centuries of human dreams, struggles, triumphs, and sorrows. It has seen wars and peace, festivals and laments, the rise of Athens and the shadows of decline. Yet through it all, it has remained like a lighthouse of memory, guiding us back to the heart of what it means to seek beauty, wisdom, and balance. As we begin this story together, imagine that you are standing there now, under the same sky the Athenians once looked upon. The stars above flicker gently. The stones beneath your feet hold the echoes of countless footsteps, and the temple itself seems to breathe softly, inviting you closer, whispering its story. This is where our journey begins, beneath the Athenian sky, in the company of the Parthenon, as we uncover its tale, slowly, gently, one chapter at a time, until sleep carries you into dreams as timeless as marble itself. The birth of Athena. Before the Parthenon rose above the Acropolis, before its gleaming marble touched the Athenian sky, there was Athena, the goddess to whom it was dedicated, the guardian of the city, and the inspiration behind its greatest temple. To understand the Parthenon, we must first step gently into the mythic world of the gods and hear the story of her birth. The tale begins with Zeus, king of the Olympians, who ruled the heavens with thunder in his hand. Zeus was mighty, but he was also wary of fate. He had heard a prophecy that any child born from his union with the goddess Metis would grow to surpass him in wisdom and strength. And so, in his fear, Zeus swallowed Metis whole, believing that in doing so, he could contain both her and the danger of the prophecy. Yet the power of destiny cannot be silenced so easily. Within Zeus's mind, Metis continued to live, and within her grew the spark of a child. For months, Zeus felt an ache inside his head, a pounding like the rhythm of drums that would not fade. The other gods watched with concern as their king grew restless, clutching his brow, lightning flashing with every groan of pain. One day, unable to bear the agony any longer, Zeus called upon Hephaestus, the god of fire and the forge. With steady hands, Hephaestus lifted his bronze axe high and, with a single strike, cleaved open the skull of Zeus. From the wound, in a blaze of light and brilliance, sprang Athena, fully grown, clad in shining armor, a spear in her hand, and a shield upon her arm. But unlike the thunderous birth that heralded her arrival, Athena's presence was not wild or chaotic. She was calm, composed, and radiant. The gods marveled at her beauty and wisdom. Her gray eyes, steady as the horizon, carried the promise of knowledge and balance. She embodied both the strength of warriors and the wisdom of philosophers. From that moment, Athena became a goddess unlike any other. She was the goddess of wisdom, guiding mortals toward knowledge, reason, and invention. She was the goddess of war, yet unlike Ares, who reveled in chaos and bloodshed, Athena represented strategy, discipline, and protection. She was a guardian of cities, a patron of artisans, and a companion to heroes. For the people of Athens, Athena was more than a distant divine figure. She was their namesake, their protector, and the soul of their city. Legends tell of a contest between Athena and Poseidon, god of the sea, to decide who would be the patron of this land. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, and a spring of salt water surged forth. But Athena planted a seed, and from it grew the first olive tree, a symbol of peace, prosperity, and endurance. The Athenians chose her gift, for it promised nourishment, trade, and life itself. And so the city took her name, Athens, and dedicated its highest place, the Acropolis, to her worship. Centuries later, the Parthenon would rise as her temple, a place not only to honor the goddess of wisdom and war, but also to remind Athenians of their identity, their culture, and their devotion to balance and beauty. Imagine now, beneath the soft night sky, the myth of Athena being told in quiet voices around a fire. The story would bring comfort to the Athenians, for it reminded them that their city was chosen and blessed, their goddess born not from chaos but from the brilliance of wisdom and the strength of divine will. The Parthenon, glowing above the city, was not just marble and stone. It was Athena herself standing eternal over her people, a reminder of the day she sprang forth from the mind of Zeus, radiant and unshakable, beneath the gaze of gods and mortals alike. The Acropolis before the Parthenon. Long before the Parthenon gleamed upon the hill, the Acropolis was already sacred ground. Rising above Athens like a natural fortress, this rocky plateau had watched over generations of people, each leaving their quiet marks upon its stones. To understand the Parthenon, we must first linger here, in the time before marble columns and golden statues, when the Acropolis was a place of mystery, faith, and transformation. Close your eyes and imagine the Acropolis not as a polished sanctuary, but as a rugged hilltop. Its cliffs fell sharply on three sides, offering a natural wall of protection. From its summit, you could see the surrounding plains, the mountains that framed Attica, and the shimmering blue of the Aegean Sea stretching endlessly to the east. It was a place of watchfulness, a place where earth and sky seemed to meet. The earliest Athenians saw in this hill more than just stone. They believed it to be a seat of the gods, a place where the divine touched the mortal world. Archaeologists tell us that long before the Parthenon, there were shrines here, small, modest sanctuaries built of wood, stone, and earth. People climbed the hill to make offerings to unseen powers, hoping for protection, fertility, and guidance. One of the oldest myths tied to the Acropolis is the contest between Athena and Poseidon for the patronage of Athens. Though the Parthenon would one day commemorate Athena's victory, the story had lived in the voices of Athenians for centuries. Even in the early days, before grand temples rose, people may have gathered here to tell and retell how Poseidon's trident struck the rock, leaving behind a salt spring, and how Athena's olive tree grew upon the hill, blessing the city with peace and prosperity. As time passed, small shrines gave way to more permanent temples. By the 6th century BCE, under the rule of the tyrant Pisistratos and his sons, the Acropolis began to take on new life. They commissioned a grand temple to Athena, later known as the Older Parthenon or Hecatompedon. Though simpler than the one that would follow, it was a symbol of Athens's devotion, built of limestone and decorated with sculptures that already hinted at the city's growing artistry. But the Acropolis was not only a place of Athena. Other gods and heroes were honored here as well. To the north stood shrines to Poseidon, Erechtheus, and Hephaestus. Legends claimed that the tomb of Cecrops, the first king of Athens, lay beneath its stones, binding the people to their mythical ancestors. This hill, therefore, was not dedicated to one story, but to many, each layer of myth and memory, adding depth to its sacredness. Then came the Persian Wars. In 480 BCE, the Persians invaded Athens and burned the Acropolis to the ground. Temples, statues, offerings, all were reduced to ash and rubble. For the Athenians, it was a wound not only to their city, but to their spirit. The sacred hill, once a beacon of devotion, stood blackened and scarred, a painful reminder of destruction. Yet even in ruin, the Acropolis remained holy. The Athenians swore an oath not to rebuild immediately, so the memory of the Persian devastation would endure, a reminder of their struggle and resilience. For years, the hill remained quiet, its charred stones watching silently over a city rebuilding itself from ashes. It was only later, in the age of Pericles, that the vision of the Parthenon was born, a vision not just of a temple, but of a symbol. By then, Athens had risen from ruin, victorious at Salamis and Marathon, and now stood at the height of its power. The scars of the past would not be erased, but transformed into strength. Upon the sacred hill, where shrines had stood, where temples had burned, a new monument would rise, one that would embody not only devotion to Athena, but also the glory of Athens itself. So when you stand before the Parthenon, glowing in moonlight or sunlight, remember that it was not the first. Beneath its foundations lies a story of beginnings and endings, of fire and renewal. The Acropolis was always sacred, always waiting, as though it knew that one day a temple like no other would rise upon its summit. And in that quiet knowledge, the hill itself became part of the myth, a guardian of memory, holding centuries of devotion before the Parthenon was ever dreamed into stone. The age of Pericles. The ashes of war still lingered when Athens began to dream again. The Acropolis, blackened by the Persian invasion, stood as a solemn reminder of both destruction and survival. For years its ruins were left untouched, a vow by the Athenians never to forget the fire that had consumed their sacred ground. Yet in time, a new spirit began to stir, a spirit not of mourning, but of renewal. It was the mid-5th century BCE, and Athens was rising to a place of extraordinary influence. Victorious in the Persian Wars, the city now led the Delian League, a coalition of Greek states united under Athenian power. Wealth flowed into Athens, carried on ships across the Aegean. Trade flourished, democracy deepened, and culture blossomed. At the heart of this transformation stood one man, Pericles. Pericles was not a king, but a statesman, chosen by the people yet unmatched in vision. He spoke with calm authority, his words weaving a sense of destiny for the city. Under his guidance, Athens would not simply rebuild. It would create monuments that would tell the world of its greatness. The Acropolis, once scarred by flames, would be crowned with temples more magnificent than any before. Pericles saw art and architecture not only as beauty, but as power. A temple could be more than stone. It could be a statement. To raise marble upon the hill was to declare that Athens had endured, that its gods were honored, and that its people had risen stronger from ruin. Thus began what would be known as the Golden Age of Athens, a time when creativity, philosophy, and civic pride intertwined. The vision for the Acropolis was vast. Pericles called upon the greatest artists and architects of the age. Among them were Ictinos and Callicrates, chosen to design the Parthenon, and the sculptor Phidias, whose genius would breathe life into its stones. Together, they would craft not just a temple, but a masterpiece, one that fused religion, politics, and art into a single harmonious creation. Yet the decision was not without controversy. Some Athenians questioned whether the wealth of the league should be spent on marble temples rather than defense. Critics accused Pericles of vanity, of using sacred funds to glorify Athens alone. But Pericles stood firm. He believed that the glory of Athens was itself a shield, a monument that would inspire awe and respect throughout Greece. And so the work began. Imagine the scene, the quarries of Mount Pentelicus ringing with the sound of chisels as blocks of pure white marble were cut and hauled toward the city. Laborers strained under the weight of stone, oxen pulling carts along dusty roads. Sculptors traced lines into the marble, their hands guided by years of skill, while architects measured angles and proportions with exquisite care. The Acropolis became a hive of activity, its ruins slowly giving way to rising columns that gleamed in the sun. But Pericles' vision was not confined to stone. It was also an age of thought. In the shadow of the rising Parthenon, philosophers like Anaxagoras, Protagoras, and later Socrates questioned the nature of the cosmos, the meaning of virtue, and the duties of man. Playwrights filled theaters with tragedies and comedies that explored human passion and folly. To live in Athens during this time was to walk through a city alive with ideas, where art and intellect met in vibrant harmony. The Parthenon became the heart of this vision. It was not simply a temple to Athena, it was Athens itself, made eternal in marble. Its construction reflected not only devotion, but confidence, a confidence that Athens, rising from ashes, now stood at the height of power. For Pericles, the temple would embody the spirit of democracy, the unity of its people, and the triumph of resilience. And so, as each column rose, as each sculpture took form, the Acropolis transformed. From ruin to radiance, the hill was reborn. The scars of war faded, replaced by a new brilliance that spoke of victory, endurance, and hope. Under Pericles, Athens had not only reclaimed its sacred ground, it had declared to the world that it was a city unlike any other, a city of beauty, wisdom, and strength. This was the age of Pericles, when Athens dared to dream in marble and to reach for eternity beneath the open Athenian sky, the building of the Parthenon. High upon the Acropolis, where the wind carried the scent of the olive groves and the voices of the city drifted upward from the agora, The work began. The year was 447 BCE. Athens was strong, confident, and proud, and the Parthenon, the grand temple to Athena, was to be its crowning jewel. It started, as all great works do, with the stone itself. From the quarries of Mount Pentelicus, 10 miles from the city, the finest white marble was cut. This marble had a luminous quality, catching the sunlight and glowing with a golden hue at dawn and dusk. Workers labored with hammers and chisels, separating massive blocks from the mountainside. Each piece was carefully shaped, then dragged by oxen and men down rough roads toward Athens. The journey was slow and grueling, yet every stone was destined to take its place in a structure unlike any other. Once at the Acropolis, the true artistry began. Master architects Ictinos and Callicrates oversaw every measurement, every angle, every line. The Parthenon was not a simple temple. It was an experiment in perfection. The architects knew that straight lines, when viewed from a distance, could appear bowed to the human eye. To correct this illusion, they designed the temple with subtle curves. The columns swelled gently at the center, a feature known as enthesas, giving them a sense of strength and vitality. The stylobate, the platform on which the columns stood, was not flat but slightly arched, so that the temple would appear perfectly straight when seen against the sky. It was a masterpiece of geometry, balance, and proportion. Each detail was deliberate, each adjustment designed to create harmony. To walk among the rising columns was to sense not only grandeur but a quiet rhythm, a balance between the human and the divine. The columns themselves were vast, carved with care from the marble drums that had been stacked and joined together with precision. When complete, there would be 46 columns surrounding the temple, each soaring nearly 40 feet high. They formed a protective ring around the cella, the inner chamber where Athena's great statue would one day stand. At the same time, sculptors labored under the direction of Phidias, the master artist of the age. To him fell the responsibility of adorning the Parthenon with carvings that would tell the story of Athens and its gods. He envisioned metopas depicting battles between gods and giants, Greeks and Amazons, men and centaurs, eternal struggles between order and chaos, civilization and wilderness. In the triangular pediments at either end, the birth of Athena and her contest with Poseidon for the land of Attica would be shown in dazzling stone. Every figure was carved with lifelike detail. Muscles tensed beneath marble skin, drapery flowed as though stirred by a breeze, and faces carried expressions of strength, sorrow, and triumph. Though the Parthenon today seems a temple of pure white stone, in its time these sculptures were painted in vivid colors, glowing reds, blues, and golds that shimmered in the bright Athenian sun. But the greatest wonder was yet to come. The statue of Athena Parthenos, crafted by Phidias himself. Inside the temple, she would stand nearly 40 feet tall, her figure made of ivory and gold. In one hand, she held Nike, the goddess of victory, and in the other, a great shield. Her gaze was calm, protective, and eternal, the very embodiment of the city that bore her name. The work was long, demanding years of labor. Carpenters, masons, sculptors, and laborers all played their part, their efforts bound together by the vision of Athens' greatness. Day after day, the clamor of tools filled the Acropolis, while below, the city thrived with trade, theater, and debate. And yet, despite the challenges, the building rose with astonishing speed. By 432 BCE, Scarcely 15 years after construction began, the Parthenon stood completed. Gleaming in the sun, its columns stretched heavenward, its sculptures alive with story and spirit. To the Athenians, it was not just a temple, but a symbol, a promise to the gods, a celebration of democracy, and a monument to resilience. Imagine it as it once was. The marble glowing at dawn, the golden figure of Athena catching the first rays of the sun, the city below bustling with life, and the Parthenon, serene and eternal, watching over it all. It was more than stone and artistry. It was the heart of Athens carved into eternity, the statue of Athena Parthenos. Within the cool shadows of the Parthenon's inner chamber, there once stood a vision so radiant, so awe-inspiring, that travelers journeyed across seas and deserts simply to behold her. She was Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin, the goddess who guarded Athens, carved and assembled under the masterful hand of Phidias, the most celebrated sculptor of his age. To step into the temple in the 5th century BCE was to enter another world. The dim light, filtering through the great doorway, touched polished marble floors and fell upon towering columns within the cella. And then, as your eyes adjusted, there she was, not a statue, but a presence, rising nearly 40 feet in height, gleaming with ivory skin and golden armor. Athena stood as both protector and symbol of her people. Phidias had chosen the most precious materials to honor her. Ivory, rare and delicate, formed her face, her arms, her hands. The ivory was polished to a luminous sheen, giving the impression of living flesh, soft and warm beneath the torchlight. Her robes and armor were crafted of gold, sheets of hammered metal, carefully applied so they could be removed and weighed if the city ever needed its wealth. In times of prosperity, she was brilliance incarnate. In times of hardship, she was Athens' treasure chest, a reminder that the goddess herself could provide for her children. Athena's stance was calm but commanding. She stood with her left arm resting lightly upon a great shield, engraved with scenes of myth and battle. Upon her right hand, balanced gracefully, stood a smaller figure, Nike, the winged goddess of victory, extending her own offering to the people of Athens. It was as though Athena herself handed victory into the hands of the city. Her armor gleamed in the flickering light of oil lamps. A helmet crowned her head, adorned with sphinxes and griffins, symbols of mystery and strength. At her breast, fastened upon her robes, lay the aegis, a protective cloak edged with serpents, with the head of Medusa at its center, its gaze said to ward off evil. Around her feet coiled a serpent, perhaps Erichthonius, the mythical king of Athens, tying the goddess even closer to the city's sacred past. And beside her shield, carved in detail too fine for the casual eye to fully absorb, Phidias had placed depictions of battles fought long before, gods against giants, men against Amazons, Greeks against Trojans. Each figure was a reminder that Athena did not merely protect through wisdom, but through strength and courage as well. Those who gazed upon her often described not just what they saw, but what they felt. The statue was not lifeless marble and metal. It seemed alive, infused with spirit, with the essence of the goddess herself. Standing before Athena Parthenos, a citizen of Athens would have felt both small and exalted, humbled by her grandeur, yet uplifted by her protection. The statue was also more than art. It was politics, faith, and identity woven into one. Pericles, the great leader of Athens, understood that the Parthenon and its goddess were not simply symbols of religion, but declarations of power. They told the world that Athens was a city guided by wisdom, fortified by courage, and blessed by the favor of the divine. The gold adorning her was not only devotion, but wealth displayed openly, proof that Athens was rich, secure, and strong. For nearly 9 centuries, Athena Parthenos stood within her temple, her gaze watching over the city. Travelers wrote of her, marveling at her brilliance, her artistry, her scale. For Athenians, she was a constant presence. When they celebrated victories, they looked to her in gratitude. When they suffered defeats, they looked to her for strength. Yet time, as always, is merciless. Earthquakes shook the Acropolis. Fires licked the wooden beams of temples. Invading armies sought plunder. At some unknown moment in history, Athena Parthenos vanished from the Parthenon. Some say she was carried away to Constantinople, where she stood in the palace of the Byzantine emperors before being destroyed. Others believe her fragments lie buried beneath the earth, lost but not forgotten. Though the statue itself is gone, her memory endures. Roman copies, ancient descriptions, and the echoes of Phidias' genius keep her alive in imagination. In dreams, one can still walk through the cool marble chamber, watch the flicker of oil lamps play upon golden armor, and feel the quiet power of Athena Parthenos standing guard. She was more than an image of a goddess. She was Athens itself, proud, wise, radiant, and eternal. The sacred stories in stone. If the statue of Athena Parthenos was the radiant heart of the Parthenon, then the sculpted friezes and pediments that adorned the temple were its living voice. Each carved figure, each flowing line of marble, whispered stories from myth and memory, tales meant to bind the Athenians not just to their goddess, but to each other. For in stone they could see who they were, who they had been, and who they aspired to become. High above the temple walls stretched the great frieze, a ribbon of marble that circled the Parthenon like a crown. On it, craftsmen had carved a single story, one not of gods battling monsters, but of Athenians themselves. It was the Panathenaic Procession, the sacred festival held in honor of Athena every 4 years. There, in delicate detail, riders on horseback galloped forward, their cloaks flowing behind them. Young maidens carried sacred vessels and baskets of offerings. Musicians played, citizens walked, elders observed, and at the center of it all, a great cloth, the peplos, was presented to Athena, woven anew by the women of Athens as a gift for their guardian goddess. What made this frieze so unusual, so striking, was that it told a story not of distant myths, but of the living city itself. It was as if the Athenians carved themselves into eternity, placing their own faces, their own lives, alongside the divine. They became part of the sacred narrative, their civic pride immortalized in marble. To gaze upon the frieze was to be reminded that each citizen was a thread in the grand fabric of Athens, woven together beneath the watch of their goddess. Above the great doorways and gables, the pediments told older, deeper stories. On the eastern side, facing the rising sun, the sculptures showed the dramatic birth of Athena. From the head of Zeus she sprang, fully grown and armored, radiant with power. The gods looked on in awe, each figure alive with motion. Helios in his chariot rising with the dawn, Dionysus reclining in relaxed wonder, goddesses gathered in astonishment as the city's patroness entered the world in a blaze of divine light. On the western pediment, another tale unfolded. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for the land of Attica. With a sweep of his trident, Poseidon struck the earth, and from it sprang a salt-water spring, a gift of the sea. But Athena, in her wisdom, planted the olive tree, offering fruit, wood, and oil, a gift of peace, prosperity, and endurance. The Athenians, so the myth said, chose her gift, and thus she became their protector. The sculptures captured the tension, the drama, and the moment of decision, as gods and mortals alike witnessed the birth of Athens' destiny. Elsewhere, on the metopes, the rectangular panels that lined the outer colonnade, scenes of mythic battles came to life. The gigantomachy, where gods clashed with giants. The centauromachi, where Lapis struggled against wild centaurs in a frenzy of chaos and order. The amazonomachy, showing Greeks locked in combat with the fierce warrior women of legend. And the Trojan War, the great epic conflict that bound all Greeks in shared memory. Each scene was more than myth. It was metaphor, a reminder that civilization must always struggle against chaos, that Athens itself stood as a bastion of order, reason, and beauty in a world often overcome by turmoil. Imagine the quiet hours of dawn, when the first light of the sun struck the marble, painting these carvings in hues of gold and rose. Or the flickering of torches at night, shadows dancing across the figures, making them seem alive, moving, breathing, whispering their stories into the darkness. To stand among the Parthenon sculptures was to walk in a gallery of myth and memory, one that spoke not in words but in the silent, eternal language of stone. For centuries these carvings endured. Travelers marveled at them, poets described them, and artists copied them. Even as time wore them down, even as wars scarred the marble, their spirit remained. Today, fragments of these sculptures are scattered across the world, some still in Athens, others far away. Yet together, in imagination, they still form a story unbroken. The Parthenon's stone stories remind us of something timeless, that human beings, no matter the century, long to be remembered, long to place themselves within the larger tapestry of existence. The Athenians did so not with parchment or fleeting words, but with marble that still endures, whispering across millennia. And so, as night settles and your breath slows, picture yourself standing before the Parthenon's sacred stories. The gods emerge from the marble. Horses gallop silently through stone. The olive tree grows eternal. And through it all, Athena's wisdom guides the city beneath her sky. The life of the Acropolis. The Parthenon was not just a building of stone and marble. It was the heart of a living world, the crown of the Acropolis, a high city that looked down upon the streets, homes, and bustling marketplaces of Athens. To understand the Parthenon is to see it not as a silent ruin, but as part of a vibrant place where faith, politics, and daily life intertwined. Climb with me now, slowly, up the sacred way, the pathway that wound its way from the lower city to the summit of the Acropolis. Imagine the footsteps of countless Athenians beneath you, sandals scuffing the stones, the air alive with the sounds of flutes and lyres, the murmur of voices, and the distant bleating of animals brought as offerings. At the height of the Panathenaic festival, the pathway would have been crowded with citizens, priests, maidens, and elders, each playing their part in a procession meant to honor their goddess, Athena. As the crowd reached the Propylaea, the grand gateway to the Acropolis, the scene transformed. Beyond its columns the plateau opened, and there, rising against the blue Attic sky, stood the Parthenon. The sunlight glowed upon its marble walls, almost blinding in brilliance, and the air itself seemed to carry a hush, as if one entered a sacred threshold between the mortal and the divine. But the Acropolis was not only the Parthenon. Scattered across its summit were other sanctuaries, each with their own stories, their own guardians. To the north stood the Erechtheion, with its famous Porch of the Maidens, where graceful statues of young women, the Caryatids, carried the weight of the temple roof upon their shoulders. This was a place of ancient myths, where the sacred olive tree of Athena grew, said to be the very gift she offered in her contest with Poseidon. Beside it, a salt-water spring bubbled within the rock, a reminder of Poseidon's claim. Here, the memory of that divine contest remained alive, carved into the very landscape of the Acropolis. Nearby stood the small but delicate temple of Nike, perched upon a bastion at the edge of the Acropolis. The Athenians called upon Nike, goddess of victory, as they looked out over the plains and seas where battles had been fought and would be fought again. Its friezes told stories of triumph, not just of gods and heroes, but of Athenians themselves, reminding all who entered that this city was both blessed and brave. Yet the Parthenon, with its scale and majesty, always drew the eye. Within its cool interior, citizens and visitors alike would leave offerings. Small statues, jewelry, weapons dedicated to the goddess, prayers whispered into the silence. The air would smell faintly of oil lamps, beeswax candles, and the faint perfume of incense. For Athenians, to step inside the Parthenon was not merely to visit a temple, but to draw near to Athena herself. Around the Acropolis, life unfolded in rhythm with the city below. Philosophers strolled through shaded groves, discussing the nature of justice and truth. Orators prepared speeches that would echo through the assembly. Children played in courtyards, their laughter rising like song. Merchants sold olives, wine, and pottery in the agora, while artisans carved marble and cast bronze, their works destined to adorn temples or serve in daily life. And always, from its sacred hill, the Parthenon looked down, watching, a symbol of the city's pride and unity. At festival times, the Acropolis became a stage of splendor. Citizens gathered in their finest garments, carrying banners, flowers, and sacred vessels. Music filled the air, dancers moved in measured steps, and priests offered prayers. At the climax of the Panathenaic festival, the great peplos, a robe woven with care and devotion, was carried through the city and presented to Athena. Draped upon her image, it was both a gift and a renewal, a promise of devotion for another cycle of years. But beyond its ceremonies, the Acropolis also carried a quiet strength in times of hardship. When enemies threatened Athens, its walls became a fortress. When plagues struck, it became a place of supplication. When prosperity returned, it became a place of thanksgiving. Through triumphs and trials alike, the Acropolis stood eternal and unyielding, like the goddess herself. Close your eyes and picture the view from the summit of the Acropolis. The city spreads below, whitewashed houses and red-tiled roofs catching the sunlight. Beyond, fields and olive groves stretch toward the sea, where ships sail across the glittering waters of the Aegean, and on the horizon, mountains rise like ancient guardians, their slopes fading into haze. From here, one feels the vastness of the world and the intimacy of belonging to one city, one people, under the protection of Athena. The Acropolis was not merely stone upon stone. It was the soul of Athens, where myth met memory, and where the divine touched the mortal. To walk among its temples was to walk among stories, to breathe history itself. And in the quiet of night, when the stars shone above and the city below lay hushed, the Parthenon gleamed softly in the moonlight. The marble glowed pale and serene, as if the goddess herself still kept watch, whispering blessings over her people, her city, her beloved Athens, the trials of time. Even the mightiest monuments are not immune to the slow, quiet passage of time. The Parthenon, gleaming atop the Acropolis, was no exception, though it had risen from ashes to brilliance under the watchful eyes of Pericles, Iktinos, Callicrates, and Phidias. Centuries would test its strength, its meaning, and its place in the hearts of Athenians. For hundreds of years, the Parthenon stood as a temple to Athena, a sanctuary of faith and art. Citizens continued to gather within its walls, offering prayers and gifts, celebrating festivals, and finding solace beneath the gaze of their golden goddess. Yet time and change are inevitable. The city of Athens itself evolved, and so too did the purpose of its sacred structures. During the rise of the Roman Empire, the Parthenon saw a transformation. The Romans, who revered Greek culture, preserved much of the temple, even as new deities and emperors came to power. For a time, the Parthenon remained a living temple, still echoing with hymns and ceremonies, yet gradually blending the traditions of its past with the customs of a changing world. Marble steps, once trodden by citizens of the city-state, now felt the sandals of travelers from distant lands. Centuries later, in the Byzantine period, the Parthenon underwent another transformation. It was converted into a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Inside the sacred chamber, the great statue of Athena was replaced with Christian icons and altars. The air was filled with incense once again, but now it carried prayers for a different faith. Even as the Parthenon adapted, the skill and artistry of its builders continued to inspire awe. The walls, columns, and sculptures remained, silent witnesses to the enduring spirit of the Acropolis. But the trials of time were not only gentle. In 1458, the Parthenon became a mosque under Ottoman rule, its interior altered to serve new rituals. A minaret rose where none had stood before, and the building became part of a city under foreign dominion. Then, in 1687, disaster struck. During a conflict between the Venetians and the Ottomans, an explosion tore through the Parthenon, when a store of gunpowder stored within was ignited. The temple's roof was destroyed, columns shattered, and sculptures broken. What had survived for centuries was suddenly fragmented, leaving only traces of its former glory. Yet even in ruins, the Parthenon continued to speak. Artists, travelers, and scholars came from across Europe to sketch its columns, copy its friezes, and write about its majesty. Its story spread far beyond Athens, inspiring neoclassical architects and painters centuries later. Even the fragments, carefully collected and displayed in museums, carried the whisper of the original vision. Time, weather, and human hands continued to challenge the Parthenon. Earthquakes shifted columns, pollution darkened the marble, and theft removed pieces of its sculptures. Yet through every trial, the Parthenon endured as a symbol, not of perfection, but of resilience. It reminded humanity that even when beauty is battered and fragile, it can survive in memory, in imagination, and in the enduring spirit of those who cherish it. To walk among the ruins today is to feel the weight of centuries. The columns, though fractured, still rise toward the sky. The remaining sculptures hint at stories that once danced across the marble. The Acropolis itself, scarred yet proud, continues to watch over Athens, as it has for millennia. And when the sun sets and the city below quiets, the Parthenon glows softly, a testament to endurance, to history, and to the human longing for permanence in a fleeting world. So, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind drifts, imagine the Parthenon standing through time, untouched by despair, resilient through fire, war, and neglect, always returning to grace, always carrying the whispers of Athens through the ages. The Parthenon, today. Centuries have passed since the first marble blocks of the Parthenon were set atop the Acropolis. The hands that lifted them, the chisels that carved the friezes, and the genius of Phidias that shaped Athena Parthenos now belong to history. Yet the Parthenon still stands, weathered, fractured yet radiant, a bridge between the ancient world and the present, a reminder of human ambition, artistry, and faith. Today, the Acropolis rises above Athens like a crown. From its summit, you can gaze upon a city that has grown and changed through millennia. Modern streets, bustling marketplaces, and busy ports spread far below. Yet here, atop the sacred hill, time slows. The Parthenon watches silently, its columns casting long shadows as the sun arcs across the sky. The temple, though incomplete and partially ruined, continues to inspire awe in all who see it. Visitors walk its paths slowly, carefully, as if aware of the countless souls who have passed before them. Each step echoes with stories of Athenians bringing offerings, of priests chanting hymns, of scholars sketching its form, and of travelers marveling at its grandeur. The marble, though chipped and faded, still glows softly in the sunlight, revealing glimpses of the careful artistry and deep devotion that went into its creation. Conservation efforts have preserved much of the Parthenon's structure. Modern engineers and historians work meticulously to stabilize its columns, restore its sculptures, and protect it from the slow erosion of wind, rain, and pollution. Even in restoration, care is taken to honor the vision of those who first shaped it, maintaining the harmony and proportions that made it so remarkable. Every restoration is an act of respect, a dialogue across time between the ancients and the present. The sculptures, some of which now reside in the Acropolis Museum or the British Museum, continue to tell their stories. Visitors pause to study the metopes, the friezes, and the pediments, imagining the battles, processions, and myths carved in stone so many centuries ago. The tales of gods and heroes, of citizens and festivals, still live in these forms, as vivid and compelling as they were when first imagined by Phidias and his craftsmen. Even at night, the Parthenon retains a quiet majesty. Moonlight bathes the columns in silver, shadows stretching across the hilltop. The city below hums softly, and the wind carries the scent of the sea and olive groves. Standing there, one can almost hear the faint echoes of ancient footsteps, the whispers of prayers, and the rustle of peplos carried in long-ago processions. It is a space where history feels alive, where the past and present meet, and where imagination can wander freely. The Parthenon today is more than a monument. It is a symbol of human achievement, endurance, and beauty. It reminds us that though time brings change, and even destruction, the creations of the human mind can endure beyond centuries. They speak of culture, of devotion, and of dreams realized in stone. For travelers, scholars, and dreamers, the Parthenon offers a place to pause, to reflect, and to marvel at what humans can achieve when guided by vision, skill, and purpose. As you let your thoughts drift, imagine walking through the Acropolis in quiet, feeling the sun warm your shoulders, and gazing upon the Parthenon's majestic columns. Picture the stories carved into the stone, the goddess Athena watching silently, the city stretching below, and the endless sky above. And as your mind grows calm, let the echoes of history lull you. Centuries of triumph, art, devotion, and resilience, a timeless lullaby that carries you gently toward rest. In this moment, the Parthenon is eternal. It is a reminder that beauty, faith, and human creativity are not lost to time, but endure quietly, waiting to inspire all who come to see, to imagine, and to dream.